All right, we have a question from Kevin. Kevin asks, breaker tripping immediately. My outside breaker, which is a 20 amp double pole GFI, trips immediately. I have a 20,000 gallon in-ground pool running a 1.5 horsepower Pentair Superflow and Pentair salt generator, which are on the same circuit. I've researched a few areas that could be the culprit with no success. Disconnected the power source to the breaker by turning off the inside breaker from the main service box. Since the breaker did not trip, I'm assuming the breaker is fine. Tested the motor shaft by manually turning the shaft with my fingers. Very easy, so I'm assuming it's not the motor. It's worthy to note that we've experienced a lot of rain this week. I'm hoping the extra moisture will dry up, which may solve the issue. But this has never happened before. I've had the pool for 5 years and all equipment has been professionally installed. Any other DIY suggestions you could provide would be appreciated.
Well, I think there's just a couple possibilities. Since this is a 2-pole GFI breaker, then we know that it is unlikely the breaker. If this was a 2-pole breaker running through a GFI, separate GFI into a pump, I would suggest that that GFI itself is the issue, because those are always the issue. But as a breaker, those very rarely, in my experience, go wrong, go bad. I think the rain or the lot of moisture has an awful lot to do with it. Now, granted, you're saying that the shaft spins freely, which that's good. However, moisture getting into the coil inside of that motor could cause some issues that you wouldn't see for a long time. And so you may want to look at what else is happening when it rains. Is there additional water dumping to that area that might be flooding the underside of that motor? Because really the only thing that at that point that's going to trip is moisture or a short in a wire. Although if nothing's changed, if we haven't changed anything, if no one tripped over the conduit extending to going to the pump, it's likely not that. It likely has something to do with the moisture itself. The other thing you could check is all of your connections in your salt system. If that's in fact plumbed with the pool itself, you may want to look at where the low voltage connectors connect into the control panel, whether it's a control box itself or whether it's part of automation. Somewhere there you're getting some additional water. If it trips all the time, or are we talking it runs and it only trips when it rains? If it's tripping all the time, then you clearly have a short in the pump itself or in the salt unit. Not the salt unit attached to your plumbing, but in the control center. Or if it's only doing it after it's been wet, then that's telling you that you're getting moisture somewhere. So if you can dry it out completely and it's tripping automatically anyway, it's one of two things, which you already suggested: in the breaker itself or in the pump itself. And I'm going to suggest more than likely in the pump itself or in the control panel itself. Not likely is it the breaker, although I'm not saying that's never happened, but that doesn't happen nearly as often as something shorting out in the binding and the windings of the pump. Pump's 5 years old. It's going to have some wear. It's going to be a little more quirky. I mean, granted, it should last for 10 years, but we've had pumps fail in 3, 4, and 5 years, depending on how they're running, how they're wired, how often, how long you're running them, if they're on and off, or if you're leaving them on. A pump staying on, running continually, is better than a pump running on and off, on and off, on and off in the long run. So there's a lot of other factors that could be in there. But I would first see if you could dry the entire thing out. If you have to put plastic over it, if it's still raining there, much like it is here in Michigan, we're getting rain just about every day. And if you have to tarp over it to try to keep it dry to see what happens, and if you can get it dried out and it runs, then it's just it's moisture getting in there, and you might want to look at the landscape and surround around it. But short of that, it's going to be trying one thing at a time, and it may go all the way back to replacing that breaker if you have to, but it's highly unlikely the breaker itself.